Hello everyone, welcome to the third video of this series, the Python course from zero to hero. Today we're going to review something a little bit more interesting, at least for me, which is user inputs. Until now, we've been working with hard-coded variables that we define by assigning them a value in the code. That means that we said, okay, X is going to be equal to this number or to this word, or A is going to be equal to this or this. But now what we want is to give the user the freedom of choosing what he wants to put inside of the variable. So that will give us a more dynamic interaction with the computer, which is basically how the computer and the software in general works. If you are filling out a formulary, or if you're working, I don't know, in the game or in a different software, you always have to put some kind of input, either whether graphic input like with an arrow or something like that, like the mouse, or type input, like if you have to write your name, if you have to give some configuration instructions or whatever. So now we're going to be working with user inputs. So Python allows us to do this by the input function, and that is what we're going to be working with. So there's two main things that you have to know about the input function and how the inputs are going to work. And the first one is that when we use the input function, everything is going to be a string. I mean, whatever you pass to the function, even if you pass brackets, if you pass a string, if you pass symbols, if you pass letters, whatever, everything is going to be a string, no matter what. So we are going to learn something called casting, which is data conversion. When we take, for example, a number and we transform that number into a string, or in the other way around, and whatever. So we're going to be working with that because it's going to be really useful to control what we want or how we want the program to behave. And the second thing is that we have to think in a different level of abstraction, because we still need in a place where this input is going to be stored. So we still have variables, and we are going to define the places where this data is going to be stored. So there are like the main concepts that you need to know about, like the input function. About the typecasting, the typecasting refers, like I said before, to the data type conversion. So let's say you're working with, I don't know, probably you need to calculate, I don't know, a ratio. And you know that that ratio is going to be an integer. But what happens when you do a division in Python, you always get a floating point number. So, for example, if you need to index a list, or if you have to do, or if you have to call a function that only takes integers as arguments, then it's going to fail because you have a floating point number. Or, for example, today we're going to develop a software that is able to calculate the average between numbers. So because the input function receives everything that the input function receives is converted into a string. If we don't convert those strings into numbers, we're not going to be able to add them to calculate the average. So that's a thing that we are going to be doing, and that is super important to learn when you are learning to code. So now let's see the code. Okay, so how this works in the code. So just like we did before, what we're going to do is we're going to create the variables that are going to store the user input. So in this case, let's say we're going to have three different numbers. So we're going to have A, we're going to have B, and we are going to have C. Okay, and these three numbers are going to be user inputs. So we're going to call the input function, and the input function can receive, for example, a statement. So it's going to be, okay, enter a number or enter the first number. So then the same for the second one. So this is going to be enter the second number, and for this one, it's going to be enter the third number. So we're going to calculate the average between three numbers. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to say, okay, when we call this program and we call the input function, if you look at here, you are going to see this statement here, which says enter the first number. So we can enter whatever we want. It doesn't matter. We have not tell the program how to behave. So we can input anything. We can input 88. Then for the second number, we can input letters. It doesn't matter. And then for the third input is exactly the same thing. So then the program ends. So that's the way the input function works when we receive the user input, but we want this function to behave in a specific way. Okay, so what are we going to do? First of all, we're going to close this one. Okay, so we need to convert this input into a number. So because as we said before, when we work with the input function is always going to return the text, is always going to return a string. And you can see this because if you print, for example, you can print the type of A, and you do the same type for B, and for C, and we run the program, we can say, okay, this is going to be 12, this is going to be this other one, and then I'm going to put only letters, but all of them are going to be from the class of string. All of them are going to be string type, and we need them to be numbers because we are going to be calculating the average. So we want to have we want to manipulate as numbers. So we're going to redefine A as float of A. This is what is called casting. So basically, we take this variable, which is going to be A, and we are going to redefine the variable as being the floating element of A. So we need to convert this variable here, which is A, into a floating point number. And we are going to do the same for all of them. So now we're going to have the three variables as floating points that we can add and divide whatever, and we can apply any mathematical function to them. So we are going to calculate the average. So how does that work? We're going to say, okay, we're going to define a variable called sum, which is going to be equal to the sum of the different elements. And then we are going to divide this by 3. So we can do everything. We can calculate average right away. We can say, okay, this is going to be the sum of the three numbers divided by 3, right? So now we want to return this result. So we are going to print the average is, and we are going to return the average, right? Okay, so now if we run the program, what are we going to get? Now we can enter the first number, 12. We can enter the second number, which is going to be 13, and then the fourth number, which is going to be 14. So we should get 13 as the average, and that's exactly what we have here. Now, if you look at the numbers, even when I said to the program that I'm not working with any floating points, because I'm converting the variables into floating point values, what I'm going to have here, and basically because we are working with the quotient, we're going to have a floating point number. So if we want, for example, to have this result as an integer, we can also do that. So if we don't want the 0.0 thing, we can rerun this, and it's going to be almost the same. So there we have. So now we're working with an integer. So I don't recommend to do this because a lot of times when divided by 3, you will be getting numbers that are not integers, are going to be floating numbers. So we want in some way um, to know what are the decimal points of those numbers. So we are going to keep this here. So basically, that's the way we can create a function that receives user input. So we can also manipulate these variables in order to apply, I don't know, some statements. So we can say, okay, if A is greater than B, then we, and A is greater than C, then we can print that the bigger, we are going to know that the biggest number is A. So we could also include like greater or equal than in case that all numbers are equal. And we can do a different statement for B, an equal statement for B being greater than A and B being greater than C. So in that case, the biggest number is going to be B. And finally, else, the biggest number is going to be C. If none of this condition is met before, then by default, I'm going to print this one. So I'm going to have two different pieces of information. First, I'm going to know which is the biggest number, and also I'm going to know which is the average of the three numbers. So if I run it again, I can say, okay, the first number is the same. It's going to be 12, 13, 14. So now I said that the biggest number is 14, which is correct because that's the third number, and the average is 13, which is also correct. And we can create another structure, another logical structure just below it. So this is, we check which is the biggest number, and then here we check which is the smallest number. Okay, so now what we are going to do, we are going to reverse the symbols here. So we are going to be looking for the smaller ones. We are going to keep the smaller or equal them because we want to account for the case of all numbers being equal. So in this case, it's going to be the same. So in that case, it's going to be the smaller number, not the bigger one. Same one here. And the same one here. So now if we run the program again, our first number is going to be 13. Oh, sorry, my bad. It's going to be 13. Then I'm going to say 12. I'm going to change the order, and 14. So the biggest number is still being 14. Now we have our smaller number, and then we have our average number. So as you see, we implement different things that we've been learning in the last two videos. We're implementing the if statement. We are implementing also a logical conjunction and. We are printing to the screen, but we're also taking the input from the user, which is something we learned today. And also we are doing the casting for the variables so we can convert the variables to be something that we can work with. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to do a different thing, but we are going to be working with user inputs also. So now we're going to define a variable called phrase, which is going to be an something that the user is going to input, and we're going to do some analytics on that phrase. So you're going to learn a couple of functions in Python. So first of all, we want the phrase to be everything in lowercase. So what we are going to do, we're going to say, okay, phrase is going to be equal to phrase dot lower. So we want everything being in lowercase. And we can, for example, calculate the number of words that our phrase is going to have. So how we can do that? We're going to use a method. So we're going to see number of words is going to be, we're going to take our phrase. There are multiple ways we can do this, but we're going to do phrase. We're going to do dot, and we are going to apply a function called count. So we say count, and we want to count the number of spaces. The number of spaces plus 1. Why? This is because if we imagine you have a phrase like the dog is outside. So here you're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4 different words, right? So we're gonna have 4 words, but you're gonna have 1, 2, 3 spaces. So if you think about I love you, for example, you're gonna have 3 words, but you're gonna have only 2 spaces. So the pattern that we have to identify here is that the number of spaces is always going to be equal to the number of words minus 1. So if we calculate the number of spaces and we add 1, we are going to find the number of words. So we can create this program that says, okay, the number of words in the phrase is number of words. And if we run it, say, okay, enter a phrase. So the dog is outside. The number of words in the phrase is 4, which is exactly what we did before. So we can manipulate the string we have. We can, for example, count, let's say we can calculate something called number of A's. So we do the same. So we count the number of letter A's that we are going to have in our word, and then we can print the same thing. So we can run the code, have the dog is outside today, and we're going to have the number of words in the phrase is going to be 5, which is correct because we're working with an extra word as before. And also the number of times that the letter A appears in the phrase is 1. And yes, and it's 1 because the dog is outside today, and today is the only word that contains an A. So this has been kind of an introduction to working with user input. We're going to be doing more interesting things as we go in more advanced topics, and we're going to create more complicated if and else statement, and we are also going to be working with loops in our next video. So I hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoy the video.